Eileen Thompson. Hey, welcome to the Faith Driven Leader podcast. I'm so glad you are here, where we are here to encourage and to equip one another to bring our faith into our leadership in real, authentic, inspirational, powerful ways. And we learn how to do that by hearing the stories of amazing faith-driven leaders. And I'm so excited about our guest today. Our guest is Mike Sharrow. Mike is the CEO of C12 Business Forums. They are the global leader in CEO and owner kind of peer advisory groups for Christians. They serve more than 4,000 members across the US, Southeast Asia, South Africa, and even Brazil. Mike leads the headquarter team. They're based in San Antonio, Texas, and he supports more than 190 full-time C12 Chairs. They call them missionpreneurs, and these folks help these CEOs and entrepreneurs and key players from these different member organizations to what they call build great businesses for a greater purpose to advance the gospel in the marketplace. And C12 is doing some amazing work. C12 members employ nearly 1 million people around the globe, and they embrace what they call a business ministry operating paradigm across all of their different industry sectors. Mike joined C12 originally as a member himself in 2010 after some previous roles in Fortune 50 companies, financial services, management consulting, and different nonprofit contexts before he started serving C12 as CEO in 2016. He is a graduate of Trinity International University in Deerfield, Illinois, and he's married to his wife, Jackie, since 2002. They have 2 daughters. And I first encountered Mike when I heard him speak at the C12 conference in March of 2023. And honestly, I was blown away by his wisdom, his humility, and his grasp for how we as faith-driven leaders can integrate our faith into our leadership and the fruit that often results from that. Mike is an exceptional and inspiring leader, and this conversation is truly packed with practical insights that you can use right now. So let's hop in and join the conversation right now. Well, hey, Mike Sharrow, thank you so much for joining us on the Faith Driven Leader podcast today. I'm just so excited to chat with you.
Likewise, Anne. It's been on my calendar for a while, but look forward to making it happen.
Awesome. Well, I always love to start off with some kind of a broad question about leadership and how, I find that leaders have different definitions of leadership. And I'm curious for you, like, how do you define leadership, and how's that definition impacted by your faith?
If I can practice uncommon brevity for me, I would say I believe leadership is the intentional harnessing of influence towards an outcome.
Those are very choiceful words. Intentional harnessing
of influence towards an outcome.
Yeah. Say more about how that connects to faith. And yeah.
So I think that's functional for me as I think about it in any context. I was talking with a person on my team who's wanting to grow in her career, and I was going, well, hey, let's talk about maximizing the influence you have. It's not just about authority and position and title. And so how can you have influence on people and process as a human, regardless of whether an org chart changes? Yeah. But I think as a Christian, then it leads to, well, then you got to go, well, how much influence do I have? And that varies. And I think too, in my context of work, like there was a moment where I was frankly asking God to get me out of a job I was in. I was lamenting and saying, like, get me out of here. I want to do something more significant. I actually made a whining list of all the things. Like I knew I was meant to do more and be more and blah, 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 blah. And I felt like God met me at my desk one night and went, well, why aren't you doing all those things? And I was like, well, because I need a job change. He's like, oh, if the logo on your shirt has to change to let you live out your identity, then maybe you don't really understand your identity. And so
wow.
I was like, I don't know what the answer to that one is. And then I remember turning my chair around, and I had 67 employees, this department I was leading. And it was Friday night, they'd all gone home. There's all these empty cubes. And I suddenly realized, like, well, I have 67 people, but many of them have families and kids, and we work with these. And I suddenly kind of started mapping out the influence potential I had. and then realized, man, and most of them, like all but three, weren't part of any church I knew of. Um, Incredibly diverse people and backgrounds. And I went, man, I've actually got this huge set of influence that I don't do anything with. And I'm asking God to upgrade me to a bigger, better place. Like
Mm,
I wasn't harnessing it. So my faith has kind of just drove me more into what is that influence and then what is that outcome, and realizing I think our sometimes in the word stewardship in my world,
yeah.
people always go to like money and giving, which is a big topic and passionate about that. But I think when we stand at the Bema seat of Christ, I don't know he's going to ask us for our tax deductible receipts accumulation, because I think he's going to ask, what did you do with the influence I gave you on the world and people?
Yeah.
And money's the simplest part, important part, but the simplest part. And
Yeah.
so my faith has led me to really kind of zero in on that influence side.
That's really, I love that. And I love the picture of turning around your chair and seeing the cubicles of the 67 people. And I think sometimes as leaders, we get a little obsessed with the size of our company or the size of the number of employees we have or the number of dollars behind our revenue each year. And recognizing when you said that, the thing I immediately thought about was, well, Jesus had 12,
Mm-hmm,
that he really truly was directly
mm-hmm,
impacting, and look at the impact. and
mm-hmm,
and and it's and if I think about that intentional word that you use as part of your definition too, wow, that focus
mm-hmm,
on where the Lord has put you
yeah,
as a leader, and to just say, I'm going to be intentional about harnessing the influence I've got
mm-hmm,
that he's given me. That's it. I really, I'm glad you were brief about that definition, because it's very powerful, and it's very, that each word has a lot of meaning. Thank you for
mm-hmm,
sharing that. It's really, really good. I'm going to remember that one.
mm-hmm.
Well, I'm curious, Mike, tell us, for folks who don't know about C12, which I didn't know about C12 until a couple of years ago and stumbled upon your organization and the work you guys do. I'd love to just tell us a little bit about, how do you work with CEOs to equip and to empower them to lead with their faith? Faith-Driven Leader podcast, we're all about
Yeah.
how can we equip and empower people. And so I love that C12 is doing that. Tell us a little bit about how you do that.
Yeah, you used a word that's actually like part of our mission statement. So literally, we're an equipping organization. So our mission is to equip Christian CEOs and owners to build great businesses and do it for a greater purpose. We do that by a global network of peer advisory groups, which is that's an
Mm,
industry term meaning essentially monthly small groups of non-competing business owners and CEOs with, in our model, a professional facilitator who leads through a monthly meeting to really work on the business and look at how do you integrate all the areas of life and leadership under a biblical worldview. So
yeah.
I got involved as a customer 14 years ago. That was my entree. It started 30 plus years ago in Florida. And now we get to work with a little over 4,000 leaders every month. And we've got 200 full-time coaches or facilitators. We call them chairs, who help serve those leaders. And really the idea is, as a leader, and whether you're a CEO, a VP, a man, whatever, oftentimes there's the spinning plates game of all the different responsibilities you got to have. And if we were to consolidate to even just three big ones, which each have kind of a bunch of spinning plates underneath them, what got me into a group 14 years ago was a friend said, do you ever feel the tension of you got the spinning plate of wanting to honor God in your business, do work as worship, wanting to hope he's saying, well done, good and faithful servant about your career and what you're doing. But if you were to say, but how do you know you're winning at that? That can be a little
Mm,
nebulous. Like
yeah.
sometimes I ask people, hey, so you're a Christian. What makes you Christian at running a roofing company or a physical therapy practice? And be like, well, I try to do good things. I don't do bad things. I don't lie, steal, cheat. I have
Yeah.
integrity. And those are all important. Those are kind of table stakes, right? And then after that, it's like, I don't really know. I mean, I'm a pediatrician. I don't know what else to do. So the work is worship plate. And then there's this eternal impact ministry plate of, am I doing enough for the kingdom?
Yeah.
And oftentimes in business, that feels like it's just a matter of, are you giving a lot of money away? And again, generosity is huge. But again, I think we're accountable for our impact on people and culture as much, if not much, much more than just money. And so that can
Yes.
feel like a burden. You're like, okay, I'm trying to run my business, do my job, and I'm trying to like serve and give and do all this stuff. But there's only so much margin time you have on evenings and weekends to do that. And then the third part is a life in order is a language we'd use
Mm.
of, in addition to being a CEO today, I'm a son of God. I'm a husband to a wife of 22 years, Jackie. I'm a girl dad to two young ladies. And Jesus cares about Mike as a son, Mike as a husband, Mike as a father, and the fruit of the spirit in my life in the process of doing all these things. And it can sometimes feel like, well, which one do I drop today? Am I going to build a
Yeah.
good business? Am I going to change the world? Or am I going to be a good person? And so we're about bringing all those three things together to say, how do we help you have a flourishing life and deal with the real issues of management,
Yeah.
the real issues of eternal impact, and flourishing as a person?
I really like that. I think that one of the things that I've observed over the course of my, I guess I would say career, but it's really kind of the span of years, not just related to work, but it feels like 15, 20 years ago, there was much more separation. And maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
just the circle I sit in, but there was much more separation between my faith and my work. And I feel like there's a lot more happening these days with the recognition that our faith impacts our work. Jesus taught us probably everything we ever would need to know about leadership. And that so many of our business decisions are not just business decisions. It's this wholly kind of integrated reality of our faith and our personal walk with the Lord and our impact on the kingdom, our impact on people, and all of that, when we do it in a godly way, actually does lead to business success.
Mm-hmm.
But I think sometimes people think of groups like C12 or other groups as like, oh, they're just sitting around to talk about Jesus. And they're not necessarily talking about the real things of work. But what I love about everything I've learned about what you all are doing and the impact I see you're having is there is just this almost seamless integration of saying, no, we have to run good businesses. We have
Yep.
to make smart strategic decisions. We have to think about these things if we're going to really truly honor and steward the leadership gift and the leadership position we've been given. So I love that you guys are doing. Have you seen a similar kind of used to
Mm-hmm.
be separated and now it's coming together? Or maybe that's just more
I think,
the
well, I still
journey
think
of my
so.
career, but
I think there's still a lot of separation out there, but I do think I think the default, even if you go to a Christian school and a great Christian church, is to still have this sacred secular divide
yeah.
and minimum and stop. It's not like we just think we're integrating by letting one influence the other. So being Christianish, being virtuous or something like that in your business. But I think the integration world has still got a ways to go. I mean,
Mm.
when we'll have probably 50 to 70 CEOs join a new group every month
Okay.
and all around the world. 85% of those when they join, we are literally introducing the fact that these things can all come together. And like I
Wow.
said, this isn't a prayer group and a Bible study that we use the Bible, we pray. We're dealing with AI last month. We're dealing with sales architecture next month. We dealt with generations of the workforce and how to lead Gen Z. We're doing stuff around DI, ESG, like real business issues, strategic planning, pricing. And they're going, what? Why are you going to talk about that? I go, well, I think the language we use is we need a view, and you could replace this word with lots of things. I think my family is my ministry. I think my
Yeah.
marriage is my ministry, but I think business is a ministry. And it
Nice.
doesn't mean business becomes a 501(c)(3 and it's just around kumbaya stuff, but it's going in the same way that I'm accountable to God to whether or not I love my wife the way Christ loved the church, which is a failing proposition and pursuit. Um, I'm accountable for how I lead this business, recognizing Jesus is the owner of it. And so if I begin to go, oh, God cares about what I do, how I do it, why I do it, and who I become in the process, it actually kind of requires almost getting childlike in your faith again, going, well, wait a minute, I run an accounting practice. What does God say about how to run an accounting practice? Well, there's not like the book of Second Hesitations has got a chapter on how to run a CPA firm. So
Right.
you kind of have to go through and really go, God, how would you have me handle this compliance issue, this hiring issue?
Yeah.
And I don't think God is glorified by poorly run companies or worldly run companies that just happen to give money or wave the
Yeah.
Christian flag. I think he's Old Testament kings and queens were held accountable not just for their personal piety, but for the kingdoms having justice and shalom and immigrants and everyone thriving there. And they were held accountable and say, yeah, they didn't worship idols. The king wasn't evil, but the king allowed things to happen in the kingdom that were not consistent with God's ways. And so I
Yes.
think in leadership, we're responsible for that integration.
Yes, I love that. I love that. It harkens back to a conversation I had with an author, David Spickard, who wrote a book called The Just Leader, who talked about in scripture how, the leader was accountable not just for the well-being of their company or the pieces that, the things they're leading, but actually the community. The
Right.
community should
The society.
thrive around us. Yes. And such an interesting topic, and not one that we all think about probably on the regular. We think about our little space and what we're leading, and gosh, we probably don't want to be accountable for anything outside of that sometimes. Yeah.
If you have back to the word influence at the very beginning in leadership, an
Yeah.
interesting exercise will oftentimes go through with leaders to say, let's quantify your influence real quick.
Mm.
So on the people side, let's talk about souls. How many employees do you have? Okay, I've got 35. I've got 150, whatever. Okay, spouses and children. Okay, that suddenly becomes 300, 400. Okay, how many customers do you have? How many vendors do you have? How many suppliers? How many sales reps? How many consultants do you engage? What's your industry peer group you connect with? Your business, your building, who are your neighbors you interact with? Who are the people you're selling to or being sold
Yeah.
by? When they quantify all that stuff out, the typical small to medium business owner typically has a direct influence number of between 5 and 8,000 people every year.
Wow.
And they're usually like, man,
Mind blown.
really?
Yeah.
Like 5 to 8,000? And we go, and then if statistically, if we use some Barna data and Pew data and go, let's just generously say 70% of them are probably not actually involved in a local church and probably not having, let's say, an intimate walk with Jesus. And you apply that number, go, okay, well, 70% of 5,000 or 8,000, okay, you've got a mega church worth of non-church people that you're influencing every week or every month or every year. That's probably bigger than your church you go to. So
Wow.
you've got more mind share influence, just thinking about spiritual things, than the typical local church
Mm.
pastor. Ooh, what's the accountability of that? And the dude is like, oh my gosh, I hadn't really thought about that. I'm like, we haven't talked about money
Yeah.
yet. We haven't talked about,
Right.
changing regulations and how you can bring justice into areas of corruption. But when you begin to quantify that map, you go, wow, we have a lot of influence. Now the question is, are we harnessing it?
Yes. Wow. What a great exercise to do, and just to recognize the truth of that.
Mm-hmm.
That probably feels daunting to people for different reasons.
Yeah, there's a there's a little grid I like to use around. I call it kind of a progressive worldview application. If you go back to that Old Testament kings and queens example,
Yeah.
the difference between a good king, an okay king, and a great king was, yes, personal, like their leadership was righteous and good, and they were faithful to God. Then it was, and they led their team well. But then it was, and what happened in the kingdom.
Yeah.
So if you kind of look across your business, if you were to think about columns, if there's a go, okay, the rows are going to be how we sell stuff, how we market, how we make stuff, how we manage people, finances, our culture, my leadership. And then you go, okay, what is good that I
Hmm.
can accept, I can accentuate? What is
Yeah.
evil, wicked that I can tear down? Where are the high places of corruption? Where can I uniquely demonstrate biblical principles that Jesus is king here? And then what's the ministry opportunities? And
Mm.
that scatter plot, as you kind of think through all the different areas of your business and those different columns, you start finding, man, I got great opportunities to shine a light on something and tell a better story. And oh, there's bad stuff that I just kind of dodge around that I probably am actually, I need to confront. And I need to
Yeah.
say, as for me and my house, we're not going to do that stuff here. Um, it kind of like, it kind of blows up your whole mind on business and gives you a lot
Yeah.
of people like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of work. You're like, well, yeah, look what you guys,
Yeah.
let's get to work.
Yeah. Let's get to work for sure. I love it. I love it. Well, I recognize in the work that you do and that C12 does, Mike, you probably have a unique perspective on what are some of the big issues that Christian leaders are facing these days, which are maybe not unlike the issues that other leaders are facing these days. But I'm curious, what are some of those kind of big issues or maybe areas that we know CEOs, leaders are struggling or trying to figure out, how do I walk through this?
Hmm. Yeah, so Christians get to have all the issues that everyone else has,
Yes.
but needs to be thinking about them as Christians, right? So we need to
Yeah.
think about the issues as Christians, which should be different. And then because we're Christians, we get to have additional issues that maybe are not everyone else's issues. So it just means welcome to more issues. Uh, so every business owner I know right now is wrestling with the same issues of talent and hiring and
Mhm.
living in this cultural moment and dealing with cancel culture and
Yes.
fragility and polarity of politics and the kind of loss of truth. What is true anymore, whether it's about,
Yeah.
gender and identity or about just what we're going to stand for as values. So we get all those things and we have
Yeah.
to lean into them and think critically and go, I don't think we're here to be survivors. So
Mm.
if we go back to Genesis, I love the folks, John Stone Street and the team at Colson Center do a great job articulating the recovery of the four-part gospel. Sometimes as Christians, we just kind of talk about like fall, cross, salvation. Those are true. But before the fall, there was creation and goodness, right? The world was created
Mm.
good. And we were told to go subdue the earth, cultivate the earth, and make it be fruitful, right? So we were
Yeah.
called to go be entrepreneurs and creators with God to continue that creative work. That all got messed up with thorns, thistles, and sin, but it didn't negate that initial calling. We were called to go build and make stuff and do it in a way that reflects God's character. Now we got to do it in a messy world. Jesus comes and brings salvation, and now there's the restoration of all things. And so we're in that
Mm.
messy in
Middle
between
part.
spot.
Yeah.
And so I think in all those areas, Christians can sometimes either want to falsely think I need to be mute about my faith and just try to get my work done, survive, and don't get in trouble, versus going like, no, if God has us here, He's put us here to be creators and to bring salt and light into this moment, which
Yeah.
means whether it's dealing with a generational issue or a cultural issue or a social issue or a regulatory issue, I actually have a kingdom assignment in that.
Yeah.
And so kind of like choose a topic, we can go down one, but I think in all these pieces, it's to not be fear victim based, but to be creator entrepreneurial based.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, let's talk about a couple of them, because I do think it, the good stuff's in the details of like, well,
Yes.
how do we walk through this? How do
Yep.
we walk through DE and
Sure.
I?
Fun one.
Let's
Let's
talk
do it.
about it. Let's like, I know you guys are doing work to equip CEOs in that
Mhm.
space.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you would tell a CEO about how to walk through that space.
Mhm. So to break down some, we call it the alphabet soup and acronyms of the world. Today you got a lot of things that all kind of interrelate. You've got
Yes.
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You've
Mhm.
got ESG, kind of a governance push of environmental, social, and governance reform. And then within all that, you can get into some human things around sexual orientation, gender identity. So that's that little slew of alphabets,
Yeah.
symbols. Those burged out of, and a lot of these things are worldly responses to legitimate problems, seeking to solve a human issue with a human medicine,
Solution. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then those always end up just creating more of the same sin issues. And so there's been obviously been tremendous history of discrimination and of
Yes.
injustice and of inequity, all those things. Like we don't need to beat the drum like that. Legitimate. The question becomes, how do you respond to that? And we believe the
Yeah.
only way to really get that is actually found in the unity of what Jesus Christ has done for us. Everything else is going to be well intended, perhaps, but flawed. So DEI and this idea of, okay, well, how do you force diversity without creating discrimination in the process? How do you address the idea of equality, which is different than equity? And how do
Yeah.
you regulate those things? And then what is inclusion? Christians sometimes are guilty of just trying to like put finger in our ears, say la 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 la
Yeah.
la la, hope it doesn't happen. And then going, okay, how do I dance to the music?
Mhm.
With businesses, and we got businesses from small private businesses to publicly traded multi-billion national businesses. you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't afford to it. And also, I think the opportunity is to not just go, how do I dance to that in a Christianish way, but actually, how do I like to say, how do you jujitsu the gibberish, lean into the energy of that, and actually put forward a better story,
Mm,
tell a better song, and that means going, hey, we actually believe, not because it's compliance with a regulation or with political pressure, that everyone's creating the image of God. And so, actually, as a company, my motivation for having a practice and a culture that values diversity and human dignity is not a CYA political thing or a
yeah.
program to check the box on an RFP. I actually want us to truly live that because it's part of my faith, and I should get a
Yeah.
chance to explain my faith in that. But if I embrace the world system of saying I'm going to do, quotas and these types of deals, I'm actually introducing employment risk, legal risk, and cultural
Mm,
risk by reinforcing actually a value system based upon ethnicity or culture or heritage or faith.
yeah.
Um, Same on equality and equity. Okay, so how do we look for? Is there any area of injustice around gender pay or ethnic origins, all those kind of things? But I'm not going to just take the world's prescription, DEI, and say I'm going to plug it in because it's actually plugging in a whole worldview that is
Yeah.
then going to create internal conflict. I know of a company that was trying to check the box of DEI and say they were gonna celebrate this month in this particular ethnic group, and then didn't realize that while they did that, they got praised for that. They had people from Southeast Asia and other places who they didn't get celebrated, and so they felt the message
Mm,
of we are now under them, and so you start
yeah.
creating this tiering.
Yeah.
And the reality is there's 40 months a year that are official months, and
That there's really only 12 on the
there's only
calendar.
12,
Yeah.
but there's 40. So
Yeah.
you kind of got to choose which one do you got to ignore. So on DEI, we did some significant work on, okay, let's, as business people, step back and look at what's the legal risk to our company in each of those programs. What's the social risk to our people? What's the risk to our customers and value position? And then how do we go back and go, what's the real issue those things are trying to solve?
Yeah.
And as Christians, what would be even a higher and better response? When a
Mm,
couple of years ago, there was the big drum up around the Dobbs case, the overturning of
yeah.
Roe v. Wade. And the language that got injected into the marketplace was reproductive health and women's rights. And so businesses were being asked, what are you doing for women? Well, gosh, half our workforces are women. 26% of the executives we serve are women. But the sadness was the question of what are you doing for women was reduced just to what are you doing about abortion?
Yeah.
We did talks with our members and said, hey, let's step up and go, let's talk about what we're doing about women. What are we doing about maternity care? What are we doing about child care and foster care costs? What are we doing for blended families? What are we doing about financial literacy and resources to help prevent financial distress? Like, let's look at the full spectrum, womb to tomb, of how you're taking care of humans and
Yeah.
particularly women who are vulnerable. And how are you as a business doing stuff upstream and downstream of that in your community? And let's kind of flip the script instead of letting it being so
Mm,
binary on just the world making it about, you know, in DI a score, or are
mhm.
you supporting the rainbow or not?
Yeah.
Like, let's tell the better story. Let's tell God's
Yeah.
story through business.
I really like that because what I hear you saying is, and I've seen too, like kind of the either this I'm just going to pretend like it's not happening or like it's not relevant to me because especially the smaller companies, because I'm a small privately held company and this is, if you want to work for me, you do it my way and I can ignore it.
Yep.
Or let me try to hit all of the numbers and do it all right, which is kind of a losing game at some point because it
Yeah.
changes so frequently, it's hard to keep up with. But what I hear you saying is either way, those are kind of human responses to a human issue.
That's right.
And if we want to really steward our leadership in a godly way with God invited into our business, we're going to invite him into those things and we're going to allow him to help us get to a better response. So let's not just react, let's
Mhm.
respond, but invite God into that. I really like that.
You said something earlier about there's something I've been wrestling with. I just finally put some words to this spring, and I'll see you react to it. Was if we seek God's way in business, it oftentimes leads to better business. Um, I sometimes get asked because we serve so many Christian business owners, like, hey, Christian business is better. Is Christian is Christian business better? And I've had to go, you know what? Christian business, just like we said, like what are the problems Christians face? We face all the same problems. We
Yeah.
just have to face them with a different set of accountability and a different value system. Christian businesses, by definition, are not necessarily better because Christians are not better. Like
Mm.
just believing in Jesus doesn't make you a better
Right.
CEO or a
Right.
better engineer or a better architect. But God's ways do. And we all know
Yes.
plenty of people who are Christians, but are pretty lousy at it and don't actually bring Jesus into their
Yes.
leadership or into their operation. But
Yeah.
they are Christians. Sometimes you wish they like didn't talk about it so much. It's like, I wish you wouldn't wave the flag because
Yeah.
I think you're actually being pretty worldly who just happen to go to church.
Yeah.
So I don't think the Christians are better, but God's ways are. And if
Yes.
as a Christians we bring God's way into the business, faithfully, rigorously, roll up our shirt sleeves and deal with the hard stuff. What I can say is when I see Christians do that, we see twice the employee engagement, half the turnover, lower
Yeah.
litigation, better profitability, better brands. Like it does usually bring a shalom, a flourishing, a
Yeah.
goodness, but not
Yeah.
because of Jesus dust and just because I claim to be a Christian. You actually have to do
Yes.
the hard work of
Yeah.
doing it God's ways. His ways
Yeah.
make it better,
And
not
and
my
I,
techniques.
that very much resonates with me, Mike. And I would just add that I think those situations are the ones where the leader has made a decision that humility and meekness, some of the fruit that they're looking for is the fruit of the spirit, not the fruit of the financial return or the size of the business growth. Those things come, but they come when we seek his kingdom first. And businesses that are run that way, I would say, yeah, those businesses probably tend to have better results, but it's ironically because the leader is looking for different fruit
Mhm.
first,
Sure.
which is such a countercultural idea, you know.
Yeah. Doing all.
So, okay, let's talk about a different topic.
Okay.
And I'm curious how you guys have talked through this one. So let's talk about AI. I've heard all kinds of interesting stuff about AI, and some people
Mhm.
think, oh, this is the end of the world as we know it, and some people think this is amazing and this is going to be great, and there's all kinds of stuff flying around about what's the ethical use of AI, all this kind of stuff. So I'm sure you guys have tackled this topic as well. Tell us a little bit about
What do you
how you
think
guys are
about it?
thinking about that. I think that there are some very good uses of it. And I think we can't use it to replace our brains. That's the slippery slope is when and how do you decide
Yeah.
when to do that?
Yeah. My little gimmicky thing I've been saying for a couple of years is a lot of people are worried about artificial intelligence, AI. I'm actually much more worried about authentic ignorance, the other AI that we've always had.
That's pretty good.
So like we have AI, it's just which AI you want. Um, so I think it requires stepping back and having a theology of technology.
Yeah.
And so if we have a fear-based position on technology, which every generation has its new thing. I mean, uh, back in the 1800s, when the train systems were being built out across the United States, um, the governor of New York, imagine this, the governor of New York, a guy named George Clinton, petitioned the federal government to make sure that we never allowed locomotives to go more than 25 miles an hour because as a Christian, he was convinced that the soul would be separated from the body if the human never traveled that fast. And it was a
Really?
spiritual risk to ever have speeds like that.
Wow. I've never heard that.
I mean,
Fascinating.
now, I mean, fast if we look back and like, man, what a myopic perspective. What was the base?
Yeah.
Well, it was a fear of the unknown and
Yeah.
kind of actually spiritualizing it. So I think going back to the Genesis creation mandate, we are called to be innovators and technology leaders. I think technology is morally neutral. And the biggest risk is if Christians abdicate technology, it will be harnessed and used for evil. But you don't beat evil, but it's not using technology. You got to choose how to harness and use it correctly. So in the same way we use automation, we use computers, we use our vehicles, we're hopefully using those for good and
Yeah.
we're putting good ethical boundaries on them. AI just represents a pretty exciting and scary because it's just so fast and so pervasive
Yeah.
frontier to go, well, okay, if I want to run a business, like we use the language business as a ministry, I want to run a great business for a greater purpose, then it needs to be competitive. It needs to scale. Whether I have 20 employees or 200 employees, I hope I'm able to pay them really well. And I'm
Yeah.
hoping able to serve customers really well. And in 10 years, most businesses, if I'm not in some way leveraging AI to either bring operational efficiency or to create a magnification and compounding of technical talent, then I'm either going to be having to charge less, pay less, or serve less people, which means I won't be running a great business and I'll be reducing my influence. And so
Yeah.
we really encourage play offense on what is AI? Where's the best use case in your business? How do you get people experimenting? How do you kind of play out and go, well, we're worried about, and then back up and solve those things? So ethical use.
Yeah.
I know down in Gainesville, Florida, there's a company named Foes Creative. They're a digital marketing firm. They went and defined, here's our ethical use policy around how we will and won't use AI in the creation of content. Here's where we respect intellectual property rights and trademark rules and creative licenses. And yet they also want to be really fast and really efficient at
Yeah.
serving more and more customers because that allows them to employ more people and live out their mission. So
Yeah.
I view AI like we're experimenting with our company. We're doing stuff from e-com bundling to analyzing text to copy creation. But I mean, the world of application and technology, we're international. So we're in 7 countries right now.
Okay.
I recorded this instructional video in English because that's my only language. We have 280 members in Brazil we serve. Well, my Portuguese is no bueno, and they speak funny Spanish there. They call it
Yeah.
Portuguese.
Yeah. It's not quite Spanish.
So we found an AI tool for a few bucks. We uploaded the video, 4-minute teaching video of me, and it got reproduced, not dubbed, but I suddenly spoke the
Wow.
dialect of Portuguese that Southern Brazil has. Mouth moved at my voice. I got emails from them be like, wow, your Brazilian Portuguese is amazing. You even got our Southern dialect. I'm like, I am not that good. That's awesome. It cost me
Yeah.
20 bucks. I didn't have to go hire an actor. So
Yeah.
those kind of efficiency savings are going to allow my business to reach more people more effectively
Yeah.
at a lower price point. So I think um, historically, people were scared of the road,
Yeah.
the printing press, of the telephone, of the internet. And we've certainly seen all those things been used. So the same roads that can take war and weapons and death can also bring the gospel and missionaries, and the same internet that can bring digital discipleship and evangelism and communication can also bring pornography and lies and
Yeah.
hatred. You don't solve it by retreating from it. You
Yeah.
need to go and be the salt and light in those technologies.
Yeah. Wow. Great perspective. Really, really good perspective. I love that. Love that. That's a little bit of a gut check for me as well. Thank you for that. I'm gonna take that and sit on that for a little bit.
My girls, if we're here, they would say, Dad, you have to confess though, I was an early user of Chat GPT and some of those tools, and I was trying to say, like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
And I one day gave it a blurb. I gave it like 5 sentences about my wife and said, could you write a really great poem for Valentine's Day for my wife, knowing these things about, and it spit out in 5 seconds a really great poem about my wife and our relationship.
Yeah.
Shared it with her. She was like, poem for like 6 stanza poem that was actually like really thoughtful and good. And then my daughters told her that AI wrote it for me, which then I negated not only all the benefit of that, but I went negative. So
Yeah.
that goes back to the authentic ignorance, leveraging artificial intelligence backfiring.
Oh, that's pretty funny. That's pretty good. Wow. All right. Next topic. I read an article just this past week. Korn Ferry did a study, and they found 71% of CEOs, this is not just Christian CEOs, this is
The market.
CEOs,
Mhm.
would say that they struggle with imposter syndrome. And the conclusion was, there's a crisis of confidence happening among leadership.
Mhm.
And I have to say, I have had moments
Mhm.
where I have felt like an imposter in my leadership journey and had to work through that with the Lord. I'm curious, has that ever been something that you've walked through? Like maybe there's a story that would be inspiring to us in
Mhm.
terms of how you walked through it and how the Lord helped you through that?
Yeah, I think the imposter syndrome is a human condition. So I mean, I think we see that like Moses, I would say, had the imposter syndrome. When
I
God,
was
you go
just
back,
thinking about it.
right?
Abraham
Or
had it, Moses had
Abraham,
it, Peter had it, like
David,
Paul had
David's
it.
dad's like, that's the runt of the family.
Yeah,
Why would you even look at him? So I mean,
right.
so that's part of the deal. I think our biggest issue is actually the narcissist. The 30% who don't have, I'm actually more worried about. The people who actually
That's a good
are
point.
totally confident. That's probably the narcissists. Um, yeah, I think actually when I stepped into this role, candidly, about 8 years ago, in that transition, there I had a naysayer in my life um, who said, you're not educated enough, qualified enough," and I was not super educated. I wasn't super qualified. I felt called and I was selected, but I there was absolutely much higher pedigree candidates that I knew, let alone didn't know. And then they actually itemized and said, "I bet you'll fail your first year at these five things." And they said, kind of spoke a opposite of a blessing, a curse. Of like, hey, these your first
Yeah.
5 years, I bet you're going to miss these five things as a leader. And I took this in my heart, and I was haunted because I got into leadership and I made some mistakes and I did too much change and I underestimated some things. And so I was having some rumbles my first year. And I was haunted by those five things. And then I so strained myself to try to accomplish those five things
Mm.
that at one point, I've got a board of directors. The chairman of the board called me and said, "Hey, Mike, I'm like, lots going on here. Don't worry about three of the things on that list. Um, this year, you just need to focus on people and this, and then worry about those things next year." And I was like, no, I'm going to do both. I'm going to do all this and a bag of chips. And he was like, well, you can't, like, why? And he eventually went, he's like, hey, what is causing you to spin up so high where you are so stressed about trying to get all these things done? Like, where is that coming from? And I wasn't cognizant, like, it wasn't each day getting up thinking about it. But when I sat still before God and asked him, he reminded me of that and just how much I was fencing with the phantoms, feeling like if I didn't get to that, then I was going to be a failure and dot dot dot. And it was hijacking my leadership.
Oh,
And when I confessed that, and he was able to go, Mike, hey, we selected you for this reason. This is your calling. This is your responsibility. Don't let what someone else has said you can or can't do or will or won't do ruin that or hijack that. That was a necessary moment of freedom. I had to go back and actually call my staff together because my flesh cycle there was then causing me to delegate that and downline that in my organization. So I had to
yeah.
own that with them and what that would cost them. But I think in today's moment, you got that stat. And ironically, another number very similar, Deloitte did a study last fall that said 72% of senior executives were burnt out and would quit if they could because of fatigue of the last 4 years of pandemic and social
Yes.
unrest and justice and political pressure and all the shifting supply chain and everything's just kind of like on fast forward.
Yeah.
And there's just a like, man, if I could quit, I would. So if you got burnout, overwhelmed, tired, and I don't know what the heck I'm doing, and this
Right.
is a brave new world, and the reality is like most of us are all leading into things you've not done before.
Yeah.
Your options are either fake it till you make it, and at some point fakeness eats you,
Yeah.
or you tap out and you get a higher rate of quitting,
Hmm.
or you can, I think we serve a God who's perfectly fine with you saying, I can't, as long as you
Yeah.
don't project that and make it that he can't. And so
Right.
I love and Paul, Corinthians, I think it was it First Corinthians 12, where he says, you're gracious, sufficient, your strength's made perfect in my weakness. And so I'm like, hey, God, I got a great opportunity for you to be strong here because I got this giant weakness.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I go in and out of that imposter syndrome on a regular basis. Honestly, it's one of the reasons why I need community with other leaders is the
Hmm.
place to find out. Like I've got a person in my group who runs a multi-billion-dollar company, and he'll wrestle with self-doubt. I have people run, fifth serial success startup, and they're wrestling doubt. And we realize, okay, we've all got this human condition.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do about it? That's actually free. It makes it a little less ominous.
I think I really, it resonates a lot what you're saying, and it feels like for those of us in leadership roles, there are two ditches, right? One ditch is the ditch of arrogance and pride and
I got
narcissism,
this.
and yeah, I got this. This is I totally know what I'm doing. And the other ditch is the one of I'm an idiot. I can't do this. I'm a failure.
Mhm.
And either of those ditches is not where we want to be. But interestingly, when I'm over in the arrogance one, I'm probably less likely to recognize that I have a need
That's
for
right.
a business partner named God,
Mhm.
right? But over here where I'm feeling underconfident and I'm, there's an opportunity there for
Mhm.
us to speak into each other's lives, as you said, the gift of community.
Mhm.
How can we lift each other up in those moments and remind each other that you're not in this alone, and you have someone who wants to guide you and lead you, even in the smallest of decisions. He actually cares about those.
Right.
And it's just such an interesting opportunity. And I wonder how much correlation there is between the 72% who are burnt out and the 71% who feel like they're imposters. I'd imagine it's a pretty high
Mhm.
correlation there, although I'm sure there are some folks who are very confident who are also a little bit burnt out, but I would imagine there's a pretty strong correlation between those two, and such an interesting opportunity to need a savior.
It, some language. So a spiritual mentor gave me some language that I continue to chew on. One, um, he once prayed for me, God, would you teach Mike how to rest at a high rate of speed? And the paradox of that was, like, we're called to find rest in the gospel, rest in Christ, and yet I'm entrusted with leadership, and there's a lot of pace, and I've got kids and life, and so if my peace is dependent upon me having just 6 hours of meditation time every day, that ain't going to happen, and you can only take
Right.
some vacations. So he's like, I think God wants you to know how to rest in Him while in motion. And so, God, would you teach Mike that? And the second was, he said, there's a difference between having a full plate, like I think we're called to be productive and take on big issues and hairy, audacious goals. Uh, but the difference between being full and heavy.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light.
Right.
But he still called Paul to go plant churches and be shipwrecked and stoned and persecuted and do hard things. So it wasn't like, hey, the walk of Christ is an easy one, but it was somehow supposed to be light. And so I think for me, a feedback loop for me that I'm doing it wrong is if I feel like Atlas, if I feel like I'm the one holding the world up, like that's God's world.
Yeah.
So I have responsibility, and I want to have a full plate, but it doesn't have to be heavy.
Yeah.
And
Well
that's
said.
that's a constant recalibration for me back to, like, am I doing it the right way?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Really good. So last question. I always love to end with this question. Mike,
Mhm.
where's God challenging you right now in your leadership?
So I wish I could graduate out of school of God challenging me in my leadership. So I feel like I think he's
I don't
always
know if
got,
any of us ever graduate from that
yeah.
school.
Um, I was journaling this week on the paradoxical tension for me that in some ways he's challenged me to be more dependent in processing more of my questions, more uh, iteratively with him, and more patiently, like not just the big stuff,
Mm,
but like, why about this meeting, about that person, what am I not seeing, and actually let him counsel me in those things and not be so ahead of my skis.
mm,
So kind of a call to dependency on the details of my business, while also then the call to be bolder in my business at the same time. And the bold
mm,
part being that it's easy as leaders to complain when we're called to create. And so any spots where I'm whining to him about why is that person, that team, or this, and going, well, what am I not doing? Like delayed, there's a in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, I forget the verse, but it says, um, evil unaddressed multiplies.
mm.
So essentially, like when you don't address something, it just keeps expanding. And so sometimes he's been showing me spots where, hey, your lack of leaning into that issue, maybe when you go la 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 la, hope it goes away, is actually propagating it. And so you're there,
Yeah.
like you have to go press into that. And by the
Right.
way, check with me to be spent at the same time. I'm like, okay, feels like gas pedal and brake pedal at the same time.
Yeah.
But that's where I'm being challenged right now.
I love it. I love it. I'm sure that that resonates with lots of folks, and I think we're called to live in that tension
Mhm.
of that dependence. And it's, it's just like when we watch our kids grow up, like we want them to be, you
Mhm.
know, listening to our wisdom so we can help them, but we also want them to learn to be independent and bold and stand true on what they've learned and what they understand and
Mhm.
all of those things. So thank you for sharing that with us. It's really, it's very resonant. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that as well. So we'll be praying for you as you work through that and as all of us work through it right alongside you as well. So.
Amen.
Well, hey, Mike, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been a blessing to me. I've been challenged and inspired by some of what you shared, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. I'm just so grateful for you joining us today.
Thanks, Anne. It was a fun conversation.
Well, I hope you'll agree with me that conversation was just filled with wisdom and humility and practicality, just this understanding that Mike has of scripture and its relevance to our roles as leaders in the marketplace is so inspiring and practical to me in a very easy to understand. This is how I would go apply this to my life. So here are a couple of the specific takeaways that I had from this conversation. I loved Mike's definition of leadership, intentional harnessing of influence for an outcome. And I was really struck by the importance of intentionality in that definition and recognizing that we need to be intentional about our influence. We have oftentimes more influence than we recognize, and that exercise that Mike walked us through of quantifying our influence and our impact and counting the number of folks that we actually do influence was sobering in some ways, but also really, really helpful. Second thing that was a good takeaway for me was I really enjoyed the conversation we had about kind of these 3 spinning plates Mike referred to, or 3 different priorities, I guess I would say, of 1, knowing God and honoring him in our day-to-day business. The second, keeping this eternal impact perspective in mind. And then also the thirdly, keeping our life in order, like our marriages and our relationships and our health, all of those things. It's really helpful perspective just to remember that all 3 of those ought to be getting our attention when we're operating healthily. We're not overly biased towards any one of them. I thought that was really good perspective. And then my last takeaway toward the end of the conversation, Mike said that someone had once encouraged him to rest at a high rate of speed. What a great phrase that was. And just the idea of learning to incorporate rest in a way that fits into your schedule. How do you find the specific moments that allow you to rest? Sometimes for me, that's just taking a quick walk outside for 5 minutes, or taking a minute to read or to play with my dog, a little moment to rest. The other day, I even actually just lay down and took like a 10-minute nap, which I thought, this can't be helpful, but actually it was really helpful. So I love that idea of resting at a high rate of speed. So here's my challenge coming out of this conversation. And I actually did this exercise. This idea of quantifying our influence, I think, is such a valuable exercise for us to do, not to be arrogant or gloat or be prideful about it, but more to recognize the mantle that the Lord has given us and really to understand, how much influence do you have that you maybe didn't realize you had? How many people are you actually influencing? You're not the only influence on all these folks' lives, but we as leaders influence a lot more people than we realize. So I really want to encourage you to do that exercise and then ask the Lord, how might you better harness that influence for kingdom outcomes? I think he'll have some good stuff to say to you about that. Hey, if you like also what you heard about C12, be sure to check them out. There's probably a chapter or group that meets in your area. There's probably a missionpreneur in your area. You can go to C12's website and find out what's going on in your part of the world, if that's something that's of interest to you. Well, as always, I hope you're really enjoying The Faith-Driven Leader. I'd really love your support. If you like this episode, would you rate it and maybe even share it if it's impacted you? That would have great value to other leaders and to us as we continue to seek great leaders to come on the show. Once again, thank you to Mike Sharrow for joining us today, and I'll look forward to talking to you next time on The Faith-Driven Leader.